because I usually forget, and now we're good. All right, so let's have a word of prayer. So let's everybody take a deep breath in and exhale. God, for the night and for the end of a day when we can rest our bodies, our minds, and our spirits, we thank you for bringing us into this space so that we may continue to learn and grow and understand the expansive nature of who you have created in the world, how you have spoken to us, and how you continue to speak to us. We thank you for all who have gathered in this space, for our communities that have allowed us to be here. We thank you for Hal, who brings so much care and compassion, knowledge, and intellect into this space, and for his energy and body and mind as he joins us from the East Coast. We are so grateful. We thank you again for the spirit that is here. May it provide us good conversation, good learning, good curiosity, and an expanding understanding of who you are, oh God. We thank you again for this time and this space, and we pray all this in the name of Christ. And God's people say, amen. All right, Hal, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and it's all you. Go for it.
Thanks so much, Bruce, and everyone for being here tonight. I'm looking forward to a certain extent, picking up where we left off yesterday in church, where the sermon was from the Gospel of Mary. And we're going to talk quite a bit about the Gospel of Mary tonight as a follow-up. And then we'll have another text that we'll look at towards the end of our time together. There's also a relatively newly discovered text called A Prayer of Thanksgiving. And what I prefer to do in these settings, as there, I'm sure a number of you who have done some study in texts that have been discovered in the last 100 years or so, and some who have not. And that's just a fine mix. I want to basically spend the evening in the following frame, that I will talk for about 10 to 15 minutes at a time. And then I will turn us to conversation for a period of 10 or 15 minutes at a time, so that we can hear what you're thinking about and what we need to talk about as we go through. My sense is that this way we can hear what you are thinking about and what you bring. I would encourage you not just to be taught or thinking in terms of questions, but thinking about what giving us your thought as well. And so I'll look to the hand raising and call on you every 10 or 15 minutes. And I should say this also, I've done this a lot around the country in this kind of setting. And because I know that we learn more in collective conversation, I really am drawn to the give and take. On the other hand, I do know that sometimes we need to make sure that we have as many people as possible talking. And so I will be gentle in asking at points if we can let someone else into the conversation beside me and a person who might be talking more. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to talk a bit now about where we started yesterday with the Gospel of Mary, and I'm going to give you some overview of the Gospel of Mary. Please forgive me, because some of you probably know most of this. One of the things that you will see is that I'm very interested in letting you know things that I don't know, despite my 30 or 40 years with these texts, because it's really one of the main ways we learn is to see how different it is to have texts that come to us in a kind of a new space. So the Gospel of Mary, and I alluded to this yesterday, is really the only early Christ people gospel that we know where there is a woman who is the protagonist. The main figure is a woman in this text. And so I would want to say generally that the early Christ people texts of the first 200 years do have a lot of vitality in terms of gender. And in fact, there are a lot of leading women, and I would want to say queer people in the first 2 centuries. And their voices are heard. So it is a little bit of an oddity that we find only one gospel in which the protagonist or the primary person is a woman, because there are so many other kinds of gender leadership in the first 2 centuries. But who is Mary in the Gospel of Mary? Here, I would say most people who read it say this is probably probably Mary Magdalene, but there's not too much reason to think that. It could be the gospel, the Mary of Bethany, or it could be, and there are some scholars, for instance, who think this is Mary the mother. And then, as I alluded to yesterday, 25% of all women in Galilee in the first century are named Mary. And this text does not give us anything but Mary as a name. The main reasons that we tend to think of this as Mary Magdalene has to do with parts of the text in which Jesus's intimacy with this Mary is substantial. So as Levi will say in the Gospel of Mary, in a fairly heightened way, when he's yelling at Peter, Levi will say, don't you remember that Jesus loved her better than all of us? That is a kind of talk that we also hear in the Gospel of Philip. And we know in terms of the canonical Gospels that Mary Magdalene is especially present in important times. So for instance, Mary Magdalene is at the resurrection scenes or the empty tomb scenes that show that she is a very important person in the stories of Jesus. So that's the biggest reason for us to think maybe Mary Magdalene, and then that this Mary takes charge in this story. So as we saw yesterday in the sermon, there's a key part of the Gospel of Mary in which the disciples, after Jesus leaves for good, the disciples fall apart. And it's at that point that Mary steps in and takes charge, comforts the disciples, and as the text says, turns their hearts to the good. Just a little bit of an overview of the text otherwise, and this would be that it's a gender dynamic text, in that one of the key parts of the text is a big fight between Peter, Andrew, and Mary. And there, Mary has come forward and told the disciples about something that Jesus taught her and did not teach anyone else. However, Andrew and Peter challenge her and says, this can't be right, because what we don't like, Peter and Andrew say is that we've never heard anything like this before. And secondly, why would he tell it to a woman? So amazing gender contestation in this text, full blown, in which she's the leader and she's challenged by two leading men. The end of that story, after the gender contestation, is not clear. Levi defends Mary, and then at the end, we have two endings, two different textual endings. One says that at the end, Levi left to tell the good news to everyone. And in the other broken text, it says that all of the people, that this group of Mary and Peter and Andrew and the disciples, that they all go out and tell the good news. So one text says has that ending, and one text says only Levi went out. So that's a little bit of an overview. So I'm going to stop here to see what this particular beginning, what that brings up for you in terms of questions and thoughts. So let's take some time for you, and I'll answer back and forth as we go. So,
right. So everybody should put yourself onto gallery view now, so you can see everybody, and then Hal, you can see people raising their hands, and Hal can just call on you.
And I'll look to see if the hand raise goes. So I'm only seeing two of us now, Bruce.
If you go up to gallery view as well, you should see.
Oh, okay, thank you. Got it.
Everybody there. Yeah.
All right. Any thoughts or questions? Yes, there's a hand. I see a real hand in Margaret.
Yep.
But Margaret doesn't look like Margaret, so.
I was interested in the comment you made about the popularity of the name Mary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recognize Mary as a Hebrew name. Is it a common Hebrew name, or is it Aramaic?
Oh, yeah, nice way to start. So Miriam is the name in the Coptic, and that translates as Mary. So that got you right back into the Hebrew, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is Miriam in Coptic and Hebrew as well. The text, of course, is in Coptic. Some of you may know. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing Karen raising.
It would also be great. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself real quick and then go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. Just name or anything else?
Yeah, and maybe name and which church, since we have a bunch of churches here.
Okay. Hi, I'm Karen, First Pres Palo Alto. Yeah, just to follow up on that, since I don't really know the name history, was that a common name because of the biblical significance, or was it common for some other reason?
Oh, I love these moments so much because I have to say, I don't know. I would say that it's a part of the Moses story would be the deepest. So in other words, the Miriam, Mary, is just very embedded in the story of the people of Israel. And so that would be my guess. I'm pretty sure that I've got to be wrong on some level.
Well, Miriam was Moses' sister.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's for sure. She was Moses' sister.
Right. Yeah. But yes, that's true. But I suspect it's, Karen, I think it's a little bit more complicated than my answer. In other words, it just seems like that's too easy an answer to be everything you need to know. But as far as I know, no scholars know anything else. I'm looking at Sarah Reyes.
I'm Sarah Reyes. I'm Bruce's mom.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, I serve New Bridges Presbyterian Church in Hayward. My question is, I downloaded this is not, it's not theological. I downloaded the information that said we were supposed to read before this. Were we supposed to read anything on the Gospel of Mary? Or, I mean, I didn't hear you preach yesterday, but I'm sort of kind of like, are we supposed to know a little bit about this? Or are you just, this is all brand new info? Are we supposed to have read something about it? I downloaded it in the Gospel of Thomas, and the Thanksgiving thing came up, not Mary.
Well, that I don't know how that happened.
Okay,
the two texts.
So
Yes, right. There's lots to read.
Okay.
But Sarah, let me just say a little bit about what you brought up, and that is, so for me, probably the biggest thing that's happened to Bible study in the last 100 years is that we've discovered 150 new texts.
Okay.
In other words, our time, meaning the last 100 to 150 years, has been a time in which we discover all kinds of new things that the early Christ people wrote. Why did this happen? And it's a clear reason why all of a sudden we have been inundated with new texts. We may not know them all, and because to a certain extent they have been ignored. But the reason that we have so many new texts to read in general, and I'm glad that you sort of thought you had to read a bunch of them, because that really does help. But what the reason is, there are two reasons. In the mid-19th century, rich Europeans started taking vacation in the Mediterranean, and especially in the southern Mediterranean. So Europeans, basically, that were wealthy, started going to Israel, Egypt, North Africa, for long periods of vacation, because it took a long time to get there. And so some of those wealthy people that went there were biblical scholars. And they started almost immediately bumping into texts that they'd never heard before, that were about the early Jesus people. Why did they find all of those texts there? And why then? Well, it turns out that, let's say if the Gospel of Mary, and we don't have many texts of the Gospel of Mary, really only 1.5. But let's say there were Gospel of Mary copies in Greece, in Italy, in Asia Minor, in Syria, in North Africa. In all of those places except North Africa, it would have disappeared because it was too moist and the papyrus would simply disappear. But in North Africa, it was so dry for so many thousands of years that they didn't fall apart in the humidity. So since 1850, a lot of people have been going and finding a lot of texts that we didn't know existed. Gospel of Mary is one of them, and so is the Gospel of Thomas and others. So thank you for getting that into our conversation, Sarah.
Thank you.
Betty Howell?
Hal, I'm interested that you mentioned that we don't know what Mary is speaking here. And I'm wondering if there's non-canonical things that we don't know that talk about a Mary that we don't know. Every time that I've ever studied anything about the Gospel of Mary, it's always been assumed, I think, from what I was reading and what I thought, that it was Mary Magdalene. So I'm wondering about your comment and where other Marys would end up being considered, or why other Marys would be considered.
Yeah, thank you so much, Betty. Again, this gets us very quickly and helpfully into all that we don't know. I think the main reason is that when one tries to think about who what I call the various kinds of Christ people in the first 200 years, who they weren't organized. There was not a central movement, so nobody was in charge. There's a whole bunch of diversity. It looks like, although the movements are not big of Jesus peoples in the first 200 years, the movements are quite spread around the Mediterranean basin. So more and more, we are pretty sure that there are a lot of other kinds of people than what might be if the Jesus movement would be organized, and if they were like a movement in which someone was in charge, you would see key figures emerging. But it's more like every time you find a new text, you find new persons. And since Mary is a name that a lot of people of Israel have, that's why it's almost certain that, well, we do have, even in the canonical texts, we have several Marys, right? We have Mary, the mother, Mary of Bethany, and Mary Magdalene. So that's kind of why I would say there's a real possibility, mainly because there's so much diversity and so many different kinds of people in this larger phenomenon of Jesus people. Does that help a little bit in terms of what you're thinking?
Thanks, Hal. Yeah, I love listening to you. So tell us anything.
Yeah, well, but that reminds me.
You don't say that about me, Betty. Yeah.
So Betty, that does remind me to say the thing you always say, or try to always say, and that is, it's really overwhelming to try to be a biblical scholar, especially with all the new texts. But the main thing is that we know so little. I mean, so I've been at this I'm 73 years old. So I've been at this for about 50 years, full time, with 6 different languages and all of that stuff. It seems clearer and clearer that people who think they know a whole bunch about the Bible need to reconsider. And so what you need to do when you hear me talk is that if it's something that seems suspicious, just think maybe Hal is lying, Another, that is, I'm guessing so much of the time. I only know about 10% at best of what I should know. And so much of the texts are contradictory to one another. So for instance, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are not the same story, right? In Mark and in John, Jesus's character is very different. In John, when you look at how Jesus teaches in John, he makes these long speeches. And in those long speeches, he only has basically one theme, and that is God the Father and I are really tight. And God the Father and I know almost everything, and we're really close. But if you see the way Jesus teaches in Mark, Jesus hardly ever does more than like 2 sentences at a time, and does not claim some hyper relationship with God, and mainly talks about the reign of God or the kingdom of God, which is a lot more diffuse. So I don't want to choose. I like both John and Mark, but one of the things I know is they're a part of this great diversity, and so that's why you need to think half the time you've been caught in some kind of lie because I don't know enough.
Very
All right,
good.
one more, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the Gospel of Mary directly. Let's see. Did I hear someone who was jumping into Iris?
Pat,
Okay, excuse me.
you're got a mute, Pat.
Okay. Well, coming off of Betty's question, is Mary, is this part of the Gnostic Gospels? Isn't part of the Gnostic? And I think it is, but I mean, you can say if it, give us a sense of that. But also, when the scriptures were put together, I think it was it in the 3rd century or someplace, after, when things were just, or you tell me when it was, when you decided what went into the various testaments and all. Why do you suppose, when, I'm gonna guess that this is Mary Magdalene, because that's the way I understand. Why do you suppose that no strong woman got a leading figure or a leading voice? Or what are the politics of this text, I guess is the question.
Wonderful. Patty, I have 4 questions from you.
Sorry.
Here. No, that's totally cool. But let me start with your last one, because that sounds like the most challenging to me. So Gospel of Mary is sort of about Jesus, but it ends up being mostly about Mary. So that's a big difference in and of itself, right? Because if you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Thomas, Philip, and all of the other or a bunch of the other Gospels, you would find Jesus and a bunch of other people following him. And almost in all of those, Mary is almost always there. Mary Magdalene is also almost all in all of the other ones. I would want to say that then if you looked at all of the other Gospels, you would find some pretty strong women. My question would be kind of like yours, but I would shift it a little bit. I would say, this is the only gospel in which the main character is not Jesus. I myself think that just is another way of showing how powerfully close to God and one another many of these communities were. and how many different kinds of leaders they had. We do know, for instance, that there are women leaders in other places. So for instance, Paul, in his letter to Corinthians, he names specifically one of the main leaders in Corinth, and her name is Chloe. Matter of fact, she has a group named for her, Chloe's people. That's where I think I would begin, Patty, in saying that it's there's quite a lot of women in most places in all of these writings, and this is why this gospel is really primarily about the character of Mary. Is I don't know, except that I experience it, frankly, in my reading of it for the last 30 years, spiritually as well as intellectually. It's just super powerful. It's a text that has amazing knowledge, not the least of which is that she is the person that knows most, and it is most strong and most comforting. All right, so I'm going to jump in a little bit more for in talking a little bit. I could just take Patty's other three questions, but I want to stay a little bit with two other texts, two other parts of this text that we haven't mentioned much yet. And before that, I have to say something that some of you will know and some of you won't. As good as the Gospel of Mary is, it's a broken text. We don't have the whole thing. There are 6 different pieces of the text that have been taken out. You can see in the manuscript itself that 6 columns of papyrus are missing, and in maybe an organized way. It's not clear, but you know exactly which of the papyri columns are not there. So nevertheless, it's got a lot to it, and I want to have us talk about 2 other things. First of all, to go a little bit deeper into this gender contestation, so that the big fight between Andrew, Peter, and Mary is about whether she is allowed to be a leader in Jesus's absence. They thought she was going to be, but then when she told them some things that Jesus told only her, Peter and Andrew didn't like it. For me, this is just such a resource, because we don't have much of this kind of resource in the Bible, or at least in our consciousness of the Bible. And that is where a woman leader and a man leader and 2 men leaders fight in public about whether it's appropriate for a woman to lead. And then into that picture comes Levi, who just blasts Peter. And Levi's on the side of Mary, and as I said before, he says, "Listen, don't you remember that he liked her best?" By the way, there's no sexual inference in that. It's that he and she have led together in many ways. This text basically when you finish reading the Gospel of Mary, and frankly, I would recommend reading it a bunch. When you come away, you know who is the main character, and it's her. So this, there are a lot of other things that one can learn in the Gospel of Mary, but that it showcases gender contestation is a great gift, because it shows how much women's leadership there is and how controversial that is. The other thing I want to just introduce here is one of the main parts of the text is when Peter asks Mary, did he tell you anything that he didn't tell us? Because he's now gone. And she says, yeah. And he said, could you tell us? And then she tells. Unfortunately, half of what she tells is a part of the broken text. But what she tells is the story. She says what Jesus said to her, and then he says it to the other disciples. She said it's a story of the trip that the soul makes to God. It's a vision of the soul ascending to God. And again, that is very much worth reading, and we could study this for 2 weeks in and of itself, because it's a powerful one. But I want to say the basic thing that happens in the rise of the soul to God is that as the soul is going to God, powers that are not friendly to the soul keep trying to stop the soul from getting to God. The power of ignorance, the power of desire, and the power of anger try to stop the soul from coming to God. Now, so this is a common kind of story in the ancient Near East. There are tens of stories, both inside Christian thought and beyond it, of the soul going to God. So this is common, but so for instance, we do know quite a bit, don't we? I'm sure many of you know about the way the way a soul is a part of stories. In this case, well, when you look at a lot of those stories, you see that some of the rise of the soul to God happens after you die, and some of those rising to God of the soul are happening while people are still living. So for instance, in the Bible itself, in the New Testament itself, in 2 Corinthians, Paul says that he ascended to the third heaven and came back. I know your Sunday school probably didn't teach a lot about that, but that's what he says in 2 Corinthians. And so this is clear that his soul's rising to the third heaven was while he was still alive. It seems to me that that's probably the case also for the story that Mary tells the disciples, for one or three primary reasons. And that is because it's real things in people's lives that stop the soul from getting to God, or tries to. By the way, the soul does make it in this story to God and rests there. But the reason that many scholars think that this is a person who is alive, who's not dead, who hasn't died, going to God is because, first of all, it's anger. Then it's desire. Then it is ignorance. That's is trying to stop the soul from getting to God. So when are people angry, ignorant, or desirous? It's when they're alive. So by and large, this is what Mary brings to the disciples is the story of a soul going to God while the soul is alive. Well, that's enough for you to tell me what you think. Let's have you jump in on these two dimensions of the Gospel of Mary. So the people I'm looking at are not raising their hands. Oh, here we go, Jeff.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jeff. I'm a Paris associate at First Press.
Wonderful.
And I guess I'm still interested in Pat's question about the Gnostic connections here.
Thank you.
And you know, my limited reading on these extra canonical books is that many of them seem to be have an orientation around Gnosticism, and I wonder if is this would you consider this the Gospel of Mary to be one of those, and how does it compare with some of the others? Are they also more Gnostic?
Thanks so much, Jeff. And because that was one of the things when Patty was talking that I wanted to get to. So that really helps us. So since you already experienced me as someone who doesn't know as much as he should, let me give you a direct answer on what I think, and then digress from that or say what else is going on. No, this is not Gnostic. Is my answer, but that is a tricky answer. What has happened in the words Gnosticism and Gnostic are very controversial, not for what they mean, but for the confusion about what they are. The first thing to say is the word Gnosticism does not exist until the 17th century. That is, it is a almost modern word. There is no evidence in the ancient first 2 centuries or 3rd or 4th century. There's no evidence of anyone saying, well, let's go and be Gnosticism. Be Gnosticism. Let's have a religion or a group that's called Gnosticism. It simply isn't there. Secondly, the word Gnostic, which is in the ancient world, simply means somebody who knows. Occasionally, the word Gnostic means someone who thinks they know a lot, and sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes, Gnostic means know-it-all. But this word, this is just, for instance, Paul uses the Greek word gnosis, and it's simply the word for knowing. And Paul uses it always positively. Hardly anyone would call Paul a Gnostic, because Gnostic is a bad thing in the way it's, in other words, Gnosticism in some scholarship, only from the 19th century really on, a little bit in the 18th and 17th century, but Gnosticism is described as the bad 2nd century heresy. And after we discovered a lot of new texts in the 19th and 20th century, the immediate conclusion, because it was different or we hadn't known about it, was, oh, this is all Gnosticism. What's happened in the last 25 years is several scholars have basically concluded in the 1990s and early 2000s that this is simply a bogus proposal. Karen King at Harvard was the leader in that, but quickly she was followed by a whole bunch of people in which they said, Professor King is right. We have made a big mistake. This is a made-up heresy by 20th century scholars who are just afraid of the new texts. Perhaps the even more amazing thing is that Karen King, and I'm friends with all these people, so I'm not talking behind their back. We say these kind of things all the time. But Elaine Pagels is even more important in this whole scenario about Gnosticism, because of course she wrote the big book for the public, right? The Gnostic Gospels. Elaine has done more for humanity to look into the new texts than any other person. We owe Elaine everything in getting our world bigger. However, Karen has convinced Elaine that she's right. Elaine, who's known for the Gnostic Gospels, and that was a good thing because it promoted our knowledge of so many of those things. Elaine doesn't let anybody use the word Gnosticism anymore and think it's real. Now, I'm just talking about Karen and Elaine, but because they're the big ones. They're the ones who've done so much. But I would say that certainly I followed both of them fairly quickly in saying, oops, we were simply too scared of looking at these new texts, and we immediately made them heresies. And what's happened with so many scholars in the last 25 to 35 years is they go back to some of the new texts that they first thought, oh, they must not be worth anything because they're just Gnostic. And I can't tell you of the hundreds of scholars who have simply said, oops. So that's why I say no, Jeff, to the answer here, is because I don't think there are any texts that are a part of Gnosticism. I would say that you need to know that there are probably not quite half of all scholars who take my position, but a whole bunch more are coming every year is what I want to say. I would love someone to just tear what I just said apart and say, that can't be right. Or just ask more questions. But anyway, that's the latest I know, or sort of know, about Gnosticism. I can say, well, no, I should say one other thing, because you were asking about the Gospel of Mary. So the Gospel of Mary does not do the things. Well, first of all, when you looked in the first half of this 20th century about what Gnosticism was, you couldn't understand it because all of the main scholars were saying different things. And that's mainly what cued Karen and Elaine into what happened in their scholarship. But here you have the main message of Jesus, as Jesus in the first part of the Gospel of Mary, he comes to give his last summary of his teachings, and that is, the realm of God is here. That's very much like the message in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. and Thomas, for that matter.
Mhm.
All right, so that's a short and dirty answer to a good question, and
Thank you.
so there's more to say. Other thoughts about the Gospel of Mary? Questions?
Go ahead, Mohan.
Yeah. So is it right that the way that she encounters this near death, this afterlife experience, is in a conversation and a dialogue with Jesus, meaning that's her revelation about how these stages happen, which, by the way, I found reminiscent. I've done some things in, it's like the Buddhist books have the first bardo, second bardo, third bardo, fourth bardo, which is really reminiscent to me about that. But the interesting thing is that it's just a discussion with her Lord, which unveils the means by which you get into the first heaven. And I found that interesting.
And such a exact question. Thank you. That's really helpful. Well, so what Mary says in this gospel is that Jesus revealed this to her in a vision. So it's not a conversation as far as we can tell. However, the structure of the vision of the rise of the soul to God is our conversations, but it's the conversations between the soul and the powers that are trying to stop the soul from getting to God. The other thing I would want to say more clearly than I did is that it seems to me that it's not a near-death experience. It's simply a way of us thinking about our lives now. That now we are on our way to God. And now there are powers that try to stop us from going to God. And sometimes they're anger, sometimes they're desire, sometimes they're ignorant. And by the way, the text is broken. It looks like there are three others that we don't know about.
What a terrible place for the text to break, of all places.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, when I first was learning about the Gospel of Mary, when I heard it was broken in the crucial spot, I just started yelling. And by the way, there are questions that people have as to whether somebody ripped it out. This is not clear. The tears are pretty exact. I don't lean towards that kind of thinking that somebody messed us up, but certainly someone does mess us up from time to time.
I see Mary Alice Thornton, your hand up.
Well, thank you.
So when you told us what Mary said to Andrew and Peter, that Jesus told her how the soul, excuse me, how the soul goes to God.
Mm-hmm.
You said it was in a vision.
Yeah.
Did you mean Mary's vision or Jesus's vision?
This is yet another thing I don't know. Can I read it to you? She said, I saw the Lord in a vision, and I said to him, Lord, I saw you today in a vision. He answered and said to me, blessed are you that you did not waver at seeing me, for where the mind is, there is the treasure. I said to him, Lord, now does one who sees the vision see it with the soul or with the Spirit? Well, so whatever, however that answers. So it looks to me like that Jesus gives her a vision in that description of it. Mary, if that, does that help you a little bit?
Well,
Mary
I think
Alice?
you read Mary saw Jesus in a vision.
Right.
Yes. Okay. That really helps clarify it.
Yeah. And by the way, no, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking when Mary tells this very key piece of information to Peter and Andrew, and maybe other men were there too listening, they must have felt so cheated that Jesus would tell that to Mary and not to them.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's very helpful. And again, you and me back and forth, Mary Alice, is so crucial just to this larger thing that is happening for us. That is, don't take Hal or anybody as what is in these texts. Go and read them yourself. I would say this one other thing, that more than 30 years ago, when I was on the road giving talks about the Bible, I thought no reason to read these new texts because they're all Gnostic and heretical. And the public kept coming to me after my speeches about other things and saying, hey, I read this and it was really interesting. And I would say, no, you don't have to read that stuff. It's just a bunch of junk. And it happened like that for me for so long that they started saying, go read it yourself. And so do the same as well. But obviously I'm into it. I want to switch gears now, folks, if we can, and do our last half hour on another text. And this is the text that did any of you in preparation read the prayer of thanksgiving? It was my understanding that you might, but it's a real short one. I think I'm going to read this text out loud. And this is the first text in a New Testament that you're using. It's the very first one. So, okay, this is only 13. This is only 13 verses long, so you're not going to fall asleep, I don't think. And you're going to be really surprised. This is the prayer they said. We give thanks to you. Every life and heart stretches toward you. O name untroubled, honored with the name of God, praised with the name of Father. To everyone and everything comes the kindness of the Father, and love and desire. And if there is a sweet and simple teaching, it gives us mind, word, and knowledge. Mind that we may understand you, word that we may interpret you, knowledge that we may know you. We rejoice and are enlightened by your knowledge. We rejoice that you have taught us about yourself. We rejoice that in the body you have made us divine through your knowledge. I'm going to read that one again. We rejoice that in the body you have made us divine through your knowledge. The thanksgiving of the human who reaches you is this alone. We know you. We have known you, O light of mind, O light of life. We have known you. O womb of all that grows, we have known you. I'm going to say this again because this is the way the person who's praying is talking to God about as a womb. O womb of all that grows, we have known you. O womb pregnant with the nature of the Father, we have known you. O never-ending endurance of the Father, who gives birth, so we worship your goodness. One wish we ask, we wish to be protected in knowledge. One protection we desire, that we not stumble in this life. When they had said these things in prayer, they welcomed one another, and they went to eat their holy food, which had no blood in it. Okay, so that's a mouthful. Anyone ever heard the prayer of the Thanksgiving? Has anyone ever heard that? Yes, Bruce has. Matter of fact, can I tell your secret, Bruce?
It's not a secret. Go ahead.
The people who, there were 19 spiritual leaders from around the country that I asked in 2012 to come together and choose from 75 different new texts which ones they wanted to add to a New Testament. And Bruce was one of those national spiritual leaders. So did you vote for or against, Bruce, in the prayer of Thanksgiving?
Oh, for, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. I still have my worksheets of the scores that we had as we walked through. Just fascinating. At some point we should talk about that whole process too with folks.
Yeah, exactly. So here, I just want to give us time for you to respond, because there's so much in this text. The two places that I find people most interested in talking about is verse 5, and that is the one that I reread. We rejoice that in the body you have made us divine through your knowledge. Pretty interesting position for Christ people, Jesus people, Christians, that might be part of their prayer, that they understand their own body has become divine through God. The other one that I reread again is this, for me, stunning gender fluid picture of God, in which God in God's self is a womb that is pregnant. I'm particularly moved by this and use it in my prayers because a pregnant womb seems to be such a powerful message for God. God's creativity in our lives we experience so often how much God is creative in our lives, but then to actually encounter God as a pregnant womb is, for me, just a very, very new set of images, or a very new metaphor that actually makes so much sense in what I would call the traditional God, who is creating all the time. Let's have you say what you'd like to talk about in terms of the prayer of Thanksgiving. Yes, I think whoever Margaret is hooked up with, I see your hand.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
I wonder if you could comment. This strikes me as a psalm. And I know that at Qumran, there were scrolls found where new psalms were written. And I'm wondering whether the Jesus people who lived here might not themselves have wanted to add to the psalms.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And the simple answer is, how could it not be?
Okay.
That is, we really know that from all kinds of parts of the New Testament itself, that they are quoting Psalms. So in the New Testament quotes Psalms, and we're not at all sure that the Psalms were finished or canonized by Israel at that time anyway. So that may have come a little bit later. So yes, composing a psalm, that composing a song, I think was an ongoing process for the Jesus people, and that they were making up new songs, new psalms all the time. One of the greatest discoveries there, and I think you're right, that this has a psalmic quality to it. But when we put together a New Testament, we found one that was even more like that, and that's called the Odes of Solomon. It's wrongly titled. The Odes of Solomon are 41 Psalms. They sound so much like the Psalms, but one of the main differences is they have Jesus in them. So there, Jesus sings. Sometimes Jesus is a part of the story of the Psalms, and they all are real songs. You can see in the Syriac, you can see the rhythm and the rhyme that music would have had. So thanks so much for that. Other things that people want to protest about or talk about or ask about in terms of the prayer of Thanksgiving. Oh yes, here we go, Patty.
I'm surprised that you use Father. You have all this birthing and then we just got a chance to read about Mary and a strong voice, and then this God is Father. This is I'm sorry, but I can't relate to this.
Oh, that's exciting to hear.
Just not for me. So I'm sorry. I hate to say that, but I mean, after we just were looking at Mary, and of course they didn't want to face Mary. They so anyway, but I had to say that. That's it.
Oh, thank you, Patty. Really. If we don't get to this part of our conversation in the next 3 weeks about not liking some stuff that I'm introducing, then we're missing a whole bunch. So thank you very much. If you I am not here's two things I want to say to you. First of all, when we decided to add 10 books to the New Testament and call it not the New Testament, but a New Testament, when we did that, we decided that we weren't going to cheat in terms of what the text really said. It was clear to me that this book would probably be the only book within 20 or 30 years that had these kind of new things in them. So I said to the people who were voting them in, it wasn't me that was voting them in, I said to them, let's not make anything better than it is. Let's simply keep the long haul in saying, well, as I do, for instance, if you want to read First Timothy, which is a whole book in the New Testament that is just scarily anti-woman. So we have to say First Timothy is mostly junk, as far as I'm concerned, even if it's in the Bible. So yes to that. So in other words, the Father was in the Coptic, so we translated it as Father. The other thing, however, that I think is stunning about this is that it is gender queer. That is, it is a really complex gendered word that mixes up the womb and the father. So let me read this again, not to defend it necessarily, because Patty, you go for it. But O womb of all that grows, we have known you. So that's my favorite because that is such a powerful female imagery. But the next sentence is amazing and really complex. A womb pregnant with the nature of the Father. A womb pregnant with the nature of the Father. Now, if that isn't complex gendered, I want to say, what is? So from my point of view, one of the things that this opens up is what one can find in a lot of the texts in and outside of the New Testament, and that is what I would call queerness. And by that, I'm not meaning sexual orientation. I'm meaning complex genderedness of that is about the Spirit. So for instance, when Paul says, when Paul talks about how weak and beaten he is, you can't find a man like that. Paul is unbelievably vulnerable, and in a lot of what he teaches. I'm not, frankly, always on the same page as Paul, but he is gendered in ways that most men weren't in that day by their vulnerability. Let me read another bit of this. O never-ending endurance of the Father who gives birth. O never-ending endurance of the Father who gives birth. Now, haven't we always wished that men would act more like they were giving birth? But this is, again, I think, what I want to say, a complicated way of being spiritual and gendered at the same time. And so here, from my point of view, one of the things that the New Testament keeps unfolding, and the stuff not in the New Testament as well, is an invitation into a non-binary genderedness that offers a lot more complexity and fullness besides just man or woman. So those are some of the things that I like about this prayer of thanksgiving, but I have to say, sometimes I think I wish the Father wouldn't have been in there, and sometimes I think it's pretty curious in a good way. Let's invite other people to jump into this. Really? Whoops. Are you still there?
Yep, we're here.
Okay, I just lost my screen. Oh, shoot.
Okay.
See if there's some other folks that would want to talk a little bit more about other parts of the prayer of thanksgiving, or keep us on this very important gendered set of questions and positions that Patty's led us into.
It's interesting. This Sunday's passage I'm preaching on is about God knitting us together in the womb.
Oh.
We might get in a little trouble if we start preaching these things side by side, but you know, hey,
Yeah, that's
interesting.
right. I'm seeing Evan wave at me.
Yes, I have a question, which I hope is quick, but is the word God ever used, or is it always Father in this gospel?
It is, it's a mix. It's a lot of the first person or second person singular you. So probably the main thing that it uses is you. But then of course it also calls God womb. And let me see, Father is used 1, 2, 3. I think Father's used 3 times. I want to say, oh no, 4 times. You is used about 6 times, I think. Womb is used 3, but in one case, the Father has a womb. No, in 2 cases, and then the Father gives birth too. Well, I'm watching. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, Jeff, you're ready.
Yeah. So so this raises my Gnostic.
Oh, good. Yes. Now I'm not hearing you, Jeff.
Jeff, you might have covered up your microphone.
Oh, okay.
There you go. You're good back. You're back.
So there in verse 5, when he says, we rejoice that in the body you have made us divine through your knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my understanding of what Gnosticism is that through that knowledge that is given to us, we are somehow made divine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so is that a misreading or what? Am I misinterpreting that?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Saying that is pretty standard Christian belief. That is, Paul says that a whole bunch. That is, listen, we're becoming divine because we know you, God, or because we know you, Jesus. So if one would want to call that Gnosticism, that would be okay with me. It's just that then that doesn't sound like Gnosticism that the scholars wrote about, because that was portrayed as heresy. Yeah, so I think if the word Gnosticism helps to come closer to that kind of message, that's very fine. But you know, Paul and John's gospel are just full of it as well.
Well, maybe we could just set aside the judgment of it being heresy.
Right. Yeah.
And then just talk about it as Gnosticism, generic Gnosticism, and without making that judgment. Would that be okay?
It'd be okay. Yeah, I think so. You would just have to be you would find yourself in funny conversations with those who like Gnosticism.
Have them call me. I'll be glad to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So in other words, when then Paul and John become Gnostic,
Right.
then the word Gnosticism loses a fair amount of its attachment, because a lot of people, I mean, so especially out there in California, you got a lot of Gnostic churches, for instance,
Yeah.
and they like to be Gnostic because it's anti-Christian or because it's heretical. And so then if one notices here and in the writings of Paul and John, how this kind of saying of an embodied divinity, because that comes among other ways through knowing, that, yeah, why would one want to complain about that?
Well, I guess I've always thought that John had elements of Gnosticism in it. It's just I've always.
You've also been called a heretic, I'm sure, Jeff. So we're all kind of in that same boat. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us out. We think we're at a good kind of pause point, Hal?
Sure. Can I say like 2 words about next week?
Go for it. Yeah. Why don't you close? Yeah, perfect.
So the main thing that I would encourage you to read in advance for next week is the Acts of Paul and Thecla. The Acts of Paul and Thecla. It's a fairly long text. It's a rather stunning story of a young woman who refuses to get married and becomes a teacher and a healer for her whole life in the 1st or 2nd century. So the Acts of Paul and Thecla. It's mostly about Thecla, this young woman who's a teacher and a healer. So.
Great, thank you. So we're, I think on our schedule, we originally had Thunder was next week, but we'll flip
I'm
those.
sorry. Oh no, I'm wrong.
Okay.
Excuse me.
That's all right. You've told us you're wrong all the time, so it's okay.
Right, yes. No, yes, read The Thunder Perfect Mind.
Which is my favorite. That is my particular favorite one, is Thunder the Perfect Mind. So that is on the website.
Yes.
If you could go and, so both of those texts are already uploaded though. And also the link to buy the New Testament if you want. You can pick it up with Derek and Craig at Reach and Teach. Again, they have copies of it. It was laid out to read as scripture. It wasn't laid out to read as a study, which I think was intentional, right, Hal? Was to lay it out like your Bible, and so it's really meant to just read.
And
so
please read other stuff that you can get a hold of.
Yeah.
Yes, and so we'll have Thecla in our 3rd week, and Thunder in our 2nd.
Yeah, awesome, perfect. Great, you all, thank you so much. Hal, thank you for staying up late with us. Hal's all the way out in Philadelphia on 3 hours, and so thank you for being with us. Everyone else, wonderful, thank you for being here. It's the same link for the next 2 Mondays, so you don't have to re-register anything, and you'll be able to just get right back in. And this is recorded, and we'll post it, so folks, if they missed it, they'll share it. We'll get Charisse to post this in the next couple days. So any last questions before we sign off? Oh, go for it, Oscar. Unmute yourself real quick. Oscar, if you could unmute.
Hal, are you willing to give us your email address in the event
Sure.
Questions for you?
Oh, absolutely. And it's really easy. It's hal@haltaussig.org. hal@haltaussig.org.
Yeah, and if you all need that, you can just zip me a note and I can send it to you too. But yeah,
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, all. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week. Have a great rest of the week. Okay. Peace.
Nice to be with you.
Take care all. Bye.